Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity to speak to Bill C-49, a bill which will create the new Canadian Museum of History. The road to Canada's 150th birthday offers Canadians from coast to coast to coast an opportunity to celebrate our history and the achievements that define who we are as Canadians. This government is determined to make the most of these opportunities to celebrate our history, and our national museums play a key role in that undertaking. Museums are considered by the public to be highly trustworthy sources of information about history and can provide valuable learning opportunities for Canadians. However, our museums are also major economic drivers, attracting tens of thousands of tourists in all regions and in both large and small communities, contributing to the $78 billion tourism industry. Mr. Speaker, a single blockbuster exhibition can generate more than $30 million in incremental tourism revenues for the surrounding region. This government has created 2 new national museums, both outside the National Capital Region in the past 4 years, the Canadian Museum of Human Rights in Winnipeg and the Canadian Museum of Immigration at Pier 21 in Halifax. This marked the first time in 40 years that a new national museum was created. Mr. Speaker, I apologize. I was to have mentioned that I'm splitting my time with the member from Oakville, and I apologize for that oversight. This marked the first time in 40 years that a new national museum was created and the first time that a national museum had been located outside the National Capital Region. Our government believes in our national museums, and we recognize the tremendous value they hold for all Canadians. As we approach Canada's 150th birthday, it is an unprecedented opportunity to celebrate our history and those achievements that define who we are as Canadians. To quote Mark O'Neill, president of the Canadian Museum of Civilization Corporation, quote, "The Canadian Museum of History will inspire a greater understanding of our Canadian identity. Canadians, as well as visitors from all around the world, will gain a deeper appreciation of Canada's unique and fascinating national journey," end of quote. However, while our national institutions do magnificent work as guardians of our heritage, not one is dedicated to telling the full narrative of our nation's history. That is the reason, Mr. Speaker, that my colleague, the Minister of Canadian Heritage and Official Languages, announced that the Government of Canada would establish the Canadian Museum of History, a national museum that will provide Canadians with an opportunity to learn about and appreciate the richness of Canadian history. 2012 was an eventful year for Canada. We celebrated the 95th anniversary of the Battle of Vimy Ridge, the bicentennial of the War of 1812, and Her Majesty the Queen's Diamond Jubilee. This year, we will celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Canadian Arctic Expedition. In 2014, we will commemorate the 100th anniversary of the First World War. Mr. Speaker, I know the opposition is asking, why does this government feel that it is important to focus the interests of Canadians on our collective history? Mr. Speaker, in 2017, this country will celebrate its 150th birthday. In the lead up to that celebration, it is important that Canadians know about, appreciate, and celebrate the wealth of our collective history. The statistics are concerning. Only 4 Canadian provinces, Ontario, Quebec, Manitoba, and Nova Scotia, require a credit in Canadian history to be a mandatory subject for graduation. 82% of young Canadians surveyed could not pass a basic Canadian history exam. This is not acceptable, Mr. Speaker. Let us begin the celebration of the 150th birthday of our country by reminding the citizens of this great nation of the events, people, and achievements that make this country unique. Let us remind Canadians and the world that the telephone by Alexander Graham Bell, the electron microscope, James Hillier and Albert Prebys, the snowblower, Arthur Sicard, the snowmobile, Armand Bombardier, the Canadarm, Spar Aerospace, and insulin, Frederick Banting and Charles Best, are all Canadian inventions. Let us inform Canadians in the world about the Hudson Bay Company, the Bluenose, the Empress of Ireland, the Franklin Expedition, and the Canadian Arctic Expedition. Let us celebrate the Battle of Vimy Ridge, the Falcon of Maltz, Buzz Burling, World War I flying aces Billy Bishop and Billy Barker. Let us reflect on the accomplishments of pianist Glenn Gould, poet Pauline Johnson, Mary Two-Axe Early, who fought to have her Aboriginal rights restored, and John Peters Humphrey, who wrote the original draft of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Let us remember that this land has been continuously occupied for more than 10,000 years. Mr. Speaker, Head Smashed in Buffalo Jump in Alberta, a World Heritage Site, was being used while the pyramids were still under construction. Anthony Island, also a heritage site, was first inhabited thousands of years ago. L'Anse aux Meadows in Newfoundland contains the ruins of a Norse settlement dating from the 11th century. Ours is not a short history. Perhaps it is time that we pause to reflect on what has made this country what it is today. The Canadian Museum of Civilization sought the opinions of Canadians, both online and in 9 cities across the country, on the personalities, events, and milestones that truly tell the Canadian story. The fact that close to 20,000 Canadians responded, Mr. Speaker, speaks to the importance of this new museum. The Canadian Museum of History will provide the public with the opportunity to appreciate how Canada's identity has been shaped over the course of our history. Canadians deserve a national museum that tells our stories and presents our country's treasures to the world. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, I hope that as many Canadians as possible will take the opportunity to celebrate Canada's 150th birthday in 2017 in the freshly renovated exhibition halls of the new Canadian Museum of History, a museum that highlights the national achievements and accomplishments that have shaped this great nation. Let me again quote Mr. O'Neill, who said, quote, "There has been no place that Canadians can point to and say, this is where we can go to discover who we are as Canadians. This is a place where we can see how we as Canadians got to where we are now. Starting today, Canada will have a place like that." End of quote. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
We have time remaining for maybe one question and response. Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Winnipeg Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll be brief. I just wanted to thank my colleague for pointing out that the first museum, federal national museum ever built outside the National Capital Region is the Museum of Human Rights in my riding. And I also want to recognize and pay tribute to those who have fundraised to bring that about. I think MPs would be interested to note, Mr. Speaker, the Museum of Natural History and the people of Winnipeg have fundraised more money for that museum than all other museums in Canadian history combined. $150 million of private money going into that museum. But my question is, when there was a 10% cost overrun, we were told to go and have a tag sale and go fundraise some more money. When there was a 100% cost overrun in the Museum of Natural History in Ottawa, the federal government simply wrote them a check, hundreds of millions of dollars. So my question is simple. Why the double standard for these museums that are outside the capital region? And secondly, how much money total are they spending to renovate the Museum of Civilization? And why is the construction started before you even have the enabling legislation passed?
The Honourable Member for Don Valley West. A short response, unfortunately. We are out of time.
I'll be brief inside my 10-minute allocation, Mr. Speaker. First, let me thank my honourable colleague. And true to his point, the Museum in Winnipeg of Human Rights is a great example, a testament to this great nation and what we as a country have done successfully. And I applaud all those who contributed to make that that museum the success that it is today, and an opportunity for people from around the world to come and see what is truly remarkable about our nation. Just a couple of quick comments, and then I'm done, Mr. Speaker. The amount spent to date is $1 million, and that amount was applied to all of the work that was done in preparation to determine the future of what Canadians from coast to coast to coast want to see. And with that, I thank you for the opportunity.
Good job. Yep.